Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this special event, Unity in Diversity, the Living Legacy of Alireza Ahmadian. I would like to thank the Vancouver Asian Heritage Month Society for putting this event together as part of the Asian Heritage Month. My name is Amir Bajehkian, and I'm grateful to have to be your co-host tonight. How can I start? Basically, tonight we gathered to celebrate, to talk about, and to remember, to honor a great soul. But it was a very difficult task for all of us because Alireza, our beloved friend, was a man who was always giving spotlight to others, not himself. So being able to talk about him while he was always behind the scenes and to celebrate his great work was a challenge for all of us. However, the values that brought us all together is something that was worthy of our effort. And I'm grateful that we have a great team. Alireza was my best friend since I came to Canada in 2005. We met by total coincidence at Langara College when I was just a dude walking into the student union, trying to get a sticker on my student ID to get my bus pass. At that time, there was no U-Pass, but for a discount. And later on, that was the beginning of a great journey. And by the last days, we were talking like almost 2 hours on the phone every day. So he had a profound impact on me. But like I said, he was always the man behind the scene. And I'm actually very surprised and very grateful to Leticia and VAHMS for convincing him to be the host for the last Vancouver Asian Heritage Month gala in 2019. That was one of my greatest memories, to see him on the stage, to see his energy, and to see him finally getting the spotlight for what he deserved. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amir. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hira, and I'm a social worker and a member for the Multicultural Advisory Council. I met Alireza through Amir a number of years ago. And just as we were setting up this whole event, I was recalling one of the first conversations I ever had with Alireza and how he talked about addressing difficult conversations through appropriate dialogue. And I was talking to him about a conversation that I had a hard time speaking to other people about, which was Islamophobia in the West and the reality of it. And what he said to me still stays with me today. He said that I should never be afraid to express myself and speak my truth, no matter what the consequences are. And I was quite touched by this. And since then, I've learned that Alireza's empathy, his compassion, his drive affected so many people, which is why we're all gathered here today to celebrate his memory and his legacy. Alireza was a mentor for many of us, especially for young people. He always encouraged us to pursue our passions. And his main message of having dialogue was given to us over and over again because it's important to have that. And, you know, one really difficult conversation aside from the Islamophobia for me was recognizing who I was as a person here in Canada. And, you know, knowing him and speaking with him, I've come up with my own sort of self-identifier. And I say that I'm an unwilling settler on this land. And what I mean by that is, when my parents immigrated here in 1995, they were unaware of the atrocities that happened here, and they were unaware of the colonization that happened and continues to happen. So, you know, a lot of those self-identity pieces for me really came from these conversations that I had with Alireza, and I am forever grateful to him for the mentorship, for the advice, and the support that he's always given myself and many, many others. Speaking of living on this land, I would like to invite William George Thomas to open our conversations, and I'll give a little bit of an intro before we do that. William George Thomas, whose traditional name is Hunas, is a youth representative from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. He is 23 years old and graduated from Queen's University with a bachelor's degree in political science. He's part of the Tsleil-Waututh youth group and currently holds the position of cultural program manager at Tsleil-Waututh Community Development Department. He's an advocate for social justice, celebrating all cultures and lifelong learning. So William George Thomas, if you could please do us the honor of opening our circle, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm William, and I'm here. I got the opportunity to be able to do the opening and speak a little bit of common grounds in solidarity, unity, and dialogue. So, Hanis Kwana Squeet, Talit Sin Se Athnuts, Tsleil-Waututh. My ancestral name is Hanis, and my English name is William. I'm from Tsleil-Waututh Nation, which resides around the Burrard Inlet. We are the Wolf Clan, and in our language, that is Takaya. So I thank the organizers first for allowing me this opportunity and following protocol of acknowledging and respecting the unceded territories of Squamish Nation, Musqueam Nation, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Under our stewardship policy, we state our historical obligation of protectors of these lands, which resides through all of Greater Vancouver and for Tsleil-Waututh all around the Burrard Inlet and most parts of North and East Vancouver. Above all, we uphold the Burrard Inlet as our entire existence that dates back from 2,000 years ago to 7,500 years ago, historically revolves around the Burrard Inlet, which supplied us with over 70% of our diet. Now, through all of this, our entire existence, we never used formal agricultural practices, instead living off of the land and the waters. But through settler colonialism and constant oppression of our identity, we stayed resilient within our culture and with our identity. It is opportunities like these to be given a voice are the important steps to reconciliation and creating long-lasting relationships. As Indigenous people, we have historically always had open arms in welcoming anyone who wants to call these lands their home. From 7 generations ahead of me to 7 generations below me, we will be open-armed, inclusive, and welcoming to all. It is an honor to be able to speak here at events surrounding diversity and unity and about creating dialogue that is inclusive of different cultures and practical manners surrounded with peaceful diplomacy and real change in policies. And a significant principle my people have lived by is that of lifelong learning. So I forgot. Sorry. And this is why it's creating spaces for such dialogue is so important. There's much unknown from different cultures and much room to learn. That is why creating dialogue like immigrant culture that Alireza fought for is important work. Solidarity starts here. It is solidarity that makes marginalized and oppressed groups both internationally and internally stronger. The more I learn of Alireza's legacy, the more I see of what a remarkable leader he was. In Indigenous eyes, he is exactly what a leader for the collective looks like. One who lives to be heard and speak for the unheard, advocate for the future and supporting youth, and champions for the community. In Indigenous culture, it is all about the community, not the individual. With this mindset comes a lot of individual sacrifice, patience, and utilizing the power of knowledge to push for this representation, to push for this difficult dialogue. So once again, I thank for the opportunity to do the opening and land acknowledgement and the chance to speak a little. Know that with all the media in Canada, especially from certain groups that surround themselves with exclusivity, bigotry, and ignorance, that there is solidarity from those who have lived on these lands longer than any others. That as Indigenous people, we have empathy and a keenness to not only share our culture, but to learn others. Reconciliation and a strong solidarity starts at events like these. We have always celebrated our leaders through their legacies. I've often heard from respected elders that when we go do this important work, that our ancestors are with us for each success. And that what they taught us is shapes how we walk in this world. That's how we celebrate the legacies. I look forward to hearing what all the amazing keynote speakers have to say, and I thank you again for allowing me to start this event off and including the Indigenous voice to follow protocol with this traditional welcoming.
Thank you. Oh, can you hear me? Thank you so much, William or Hunas, for those very, very important words and recognizing and welcoming us to the traditional territories. I would like to reiterate what you had said and just say that to also acknowledge the land and say that we are also very, very grateful to be working, playing, and living with gratitude on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Semiahmoo, Kwantlen Katsi, and Tawasin nations. And with that being said, I would now like to welcome Micheal Hwong to speak about Alireza. Micheal Hwong is a lawyer, social entrepreneur, and advocate for social justice. Micheal has served on the boards of many local and international community development, educational, and business organizations, and founded many community events and festivals that promote social justice and intercultural understanding. His efforts were recognized in 2003. He was a recipient of the Queen's Golden Jubilee Medal and as the Business Person of the Year by the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce. Micheal currently serves on the boards of New Vista Society, the Spirit of the Children's Society, and BC's Small Business Roundtable. So Micheal Hwong, would you please go ahead? Thank you.
Thank you, Hira, and thank you, Amir and William, for opening. It is truly an honor and joy for me to speak at this event to celebrate Alireza Ahmadian's living legacy. I want to first thank his wife, Fatima, and his brother, Hamid, for inviting me to speak today. I also wish to thank all the organizers, sponsors, and participants of this event. Like William, I believe that events like this bring diverse people together and help our nation achieve unity in diversity. I have this honor today because I had the blessing to meet Ali 2 years ago when he invited me to his studio for an interview. We discussed the role of the arts and cultural events in Canada's reconciliation with Indigenous people. And during that interview, Ali asked me why a lawyer like me is involved in operating a theater for comedy, music, and other performing arts. I answered that performing artists on stages have greater influence and audience to educate the public and shape our culture than a lonely lawyer in a dark office. And that reconciliation with the Indigenous people is something that we must do. We must all do first if we truly want equal rights as Canadians and achieve multiculturalism in Canada. Excuse me. How can we demand equal rights for ourselves, including the right to keep our culture and languages in Canada, when there's a group of people in Canada who face systemic and personal racism every day and who had almost lost their lands, cultures, and languages? If we want the Constitution to give us equality, then we must understand our Constitution and the other rights or rights of the others under the same Constitution. At minimum, we must not use our advocacy for equality to suppress the traditional and specific rights of the Indigenous people under the same Constitution, which pre-existed the Confederation of Canada and which pre-existed all of us before we were born or came to Canada. So then Ali asked me during the interview, do you think other immigrants share your sentiments and sympathize with Indigenous people in Canada? I took his question, insightful question, to be rhetorical, and that is why I accepted the invitation to speak here today. To advance our, I dare say, Ali's and mine, common quest for diversity, dialogues, unity, and inclusion of all people in Canada. By reminding everyone here today that we need to settle treaties and promote reconciliation with Indigenous people Canada first. The title of our discussion today is Unity in Diversity. So, but what does that mean? And how do we achieve it? Like most people do, I searched on the Google. I was used to using words harmonious diversity, but unity in diversity was a little different angle take on the same concept. The first Google search result was a Canadian shoes company called unityindiversity.ca. Now, I know we are not here to talk about shoes, But this Canadian company, has something to contribute to this discussion. Their website says, quote, Canada is unique in many ways with its diverse cultural and ancient roots. It carries a remarkable source of imagination, unquote. Just like John Lennon's famous song about peace and unity, I think we need imagination for this discussion. Then below that search result was a more formal and profound explanation rooted in both Western and Eastern religions and philosophies. In Islam, this concept was used to advance the metaphysical concept of the universe, oneness of being. I think I pronounced it right, wadat al-wujud, which says that reality is one and that God's reality is the only true existence. Then later, another philosopher expanded that concept to be more holistic and symmetrical, said unity is in diversity and diversity in unity. That kind of symmetrical saying reminded me of a Buddhist concept that I learned about, Buddhist concept of metaphysical universe that I learned a few years ago, and roughly translates into form or reality is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness or the infinite world is nothing other than the reality. But I digress a little bit, but I do mention these because I believe Ali was deeply spiritual and philosophical man. And so to understand Ali's thoughts and words, I wanted us to have some profound and universal concepts as a proper background to our discussion today, to our specific discussions. In a more simple and present day context, I would like you to imagine the rainbow. It is commonly used symbol of diversity, as you know, because it is created by one visible light refracted by a prism. It is one light, but has diversity of colors. Such simple concept is also found in the Latin words e pluribus unum, which means one from many. This was the first motto of the United States of America before it was replaced by "In God We Trust." The founders of that country wanted to form a single nation from a collection of states. And this is why some of us call it the US to be a melting pot. I'm sure many are disappointed today by the divisions that exist in that country. We in Canada chose a different model, which we call euphemistically as a mosaic model. It allows for and encourages different cultures to coexist. And like William said, this goes back to when the indigenous people welcome visitors, and with open arms. And this concept of mosaic was also necessary for the formation of this nation, which was formed by two different cultures, British and French. And some believe that multiculturalism was just an afterthought to appease the non-English and non-French speaking Canadians when Pierre Trudeau proposed the Official Languages Act. But whatever, anyway, both models of diversity, the mosaic or melting pot, have been and are still being tested and challenged. Even as we make progress each day on diversity and inclusion, we often feel that our pursuit of peaceful coexistence is threatened and at risk every step of the way. Because for every action, there is a reaction. And our quest for unity and diversity is sometimes seen as unity versus diversity. So it is in this context that we're here today to ponder about the concept of unity and diversity that Ali embraced. During his interview, Ali asked if I thought this was achievable, and I want to share with you his words. Listen to this question.
Some people would argue that the term used, harmonious diversity, is an oxymoron, because diversity in and of itself is about different things that are not necessarily similar, definitely not identical. And to have another adjective, harmonious, added to that, it seems like something undoable.
So what would Ali say about recent incidents that we are faced today, about the so-called rising racism and hatred against Asians in Vancouver? What would he say about our reaction to such incidents, such as the anti-Asian hate campaigns? Would he think it's the right reaction or remedy to such a problem? What would he say about the recent detention of a Black retired Supreme Court judge by Vancouver police? And then there's reaction. What would he say about Vancouver mayor's apology to the judge and the blanket admission that all our institutions are based on colonialism and as such are systemically racist? If you read any of these issues posted on social media, you can be sure that the comments follow them are shockingly worse than the issues themselves. I'm sure most of us avoid reading or posting comments on these social medias because they are more offensive and divisive. And this pandemic has made it as easy for us and comfortable even for us to be part of the silent majority. We feel something, but we shy away from getting embroiled in controversy. And to that, I'm sure you have heard these words, that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for a good person to do nothing. So these modern problems, current problems, how do we deal with them? What can we do? What should we do? Here is what Ali said after the last recording that I just shared. Listen to this.
How would you respond to that?
He asked for opinions of others.
How would you respond to that?
And then he made us think about the answer. And then he did the most important thing, I would argue. He sat back and listened. Like Amir said, he allowed for discussions, asked questions. He wasn't behind the sunlight, but he listened carefully. Ali's brother Hamid, who was here today, shared with me a book that Ali was reading. It was titled The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, written by Jonathan Haidt. Haidt explains that people have intuitions first, and then use our logic and brains to justify and support these intuitions. And he goes into long study in psychology and sociology to explain this. We are conditioned to provide answers to questions and solutions to problems. As a lawyer, I know that too well. People come to me for answers, and I am programmed to find solutions. And when someone has a different answer or solution than we have, we're quick to defend our position or attack theirs. But Ali has shown us a different way. And I think we can do the same, starting here and now. Ask, think, and then most importantly, listen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Micheal. Those words were the words of wisdom, and especially I had the privilege to listen to the interview that Ali had with you, and this is the last interview that he posted on a review. For those who don't know, Alireza had a radio show called Review on Spice Radio, and he had many important discussions and conversations on the issues relevant to our society there. Our next item is a little bit different. It's from it's coming from a great friend, a mutual friend that I met through Alireza himself. Sefer Ojeti is a young musician based in Vancouver, and very talented one. And I got to meet him through Alireza when I started the campaign for ICWC. And Sefer I can say that he's one of the most talented and innovative people in music that I know, because he's deeply connected to his roots, but he also understands the music of the society that we live in. And I remember a very interesting story that he shared with me when he was talking about Alireza, because Sepper made the opening music for a review that basically Alireza asked for something that is both funny and terrifying or scary. So it was important. So we're going to hear a little piece by Sepper. I believe the title is Whispering Your Name. And with that, please take a listen. Thank you. Thank you, Sepper. I don't think there's any comment is necessary for this, because the music spoke for itself. the feeling that was in it. And I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. When we get caught up in our own echo chamber, we only talk to like-minded people and do not try to convince the wider world. We do not show up at the events that challenge our politics and have limited dialogue with our political adversaries. We label our political opponents and turn them into caricatures. Both left and right take part in this. This is a comment that I found, a quote from Alireza, on a piece that he wrote on March 30th, 2017, as a reflection of his involvement in the Clinton campaign in 2016. The title is Leadership Lessons from the Campaign Trail. And this brings us to the main piece of the event, which is a panel, a discussion, a dialogue, on how we can have, how to tackle issues and how to bring the community together to have dialogue. Our first panelist here is Bill Walters. I had the privilege of meeting Bill through Alireza himself. Bill is semi-retired, more or less, but continues to be highly engaged as a community volunteer, such as being a board member of a large long-term care and housing organization, an advisor with the Vancouver Foundation, and as a patient advisor on several provincial health and health authority committees. He had a long career as a senior executive in provincial government, where he accumulated extensive experience working with multiple stakeholders in areas of immigrant settlement, multiculturalism, anti-racism, education, training, and labor market policy and programming. Prior to working in government, Bill worked in the education sector as a youth counselor and advocate, and in the non-for-profit sector as the executive director and board member with a focus on youth employment and academic upgrading programs. For 5 years, up until 2018, he was the project lead for the implementation of the Diversity on Board program in Diversity on Board program in BC, which recruited, trained, and matched diverse candidates to not-for-profit boards. And this also involves extensive research in the area of diversity and inclusion. In his spare time, Bill is an avid musician and performs with several jazz and concert ensembles. And just one thing to add, I actually met Bill in one of the VAHMS galas. And that was, we were both invited by Alireza. And I clearly remember the last conversation that we had. And my question to Bill is actually around that conversation. How do we bring communities, how can communities more effectively affect policy? How do you engage the right people in the communities? Because a lot of times we just preach to the choir, or we don't engage the right people, or people in different communities and stakeholders do not hear about the proposed ideas. Bill?
Thank you, Amir, and thank you, everybody. And it's a great honor and privilege for me. I've known Alireza, I knew since about 2014, and he was my philosopher prince who continued to push me forward in my thinking. He always had new ideas, questions. Through email and many cups of tea, we had some fantastic discussions. So I know your time is very precious this evening, so I'll jump right into it. I only know what I know, and I guess I am a bit of an elder, if you might tell by my beard. I have lived in this community all my life. My grandparents and great-grandparents were immigrant settlers from Scandinavian countries or Great Britain, who came in the early 1900s and settled as farmers in British Columbia. My grandfather met a woman in Vancouver in around 1910 who happened to be born in 1858. She was actually born a slave, and she was our Aunt Matilda. And I reflect on my life and unusual connection we have to the land, because I've been influenced by my family's immigrant history, and also the fact that I sat on the lap of a woman who lived to be 107, and she was born a slave and was emancipated by Abraham Lincoln. Now, you put that into perspective, it is a challenge. And my father also worked with Indigenous longshoremen in the 1940s. So I grew up knowing all of these other cultures. And I found my journey has been quite interesting. But I have been an advocate for the last 50 years, from youth, and now it's to long-term care and seniors, because I am one of those. And I have had successes and failures. So I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of what I would recommend to anybody who's journeying into this notion of policy change and lobbying. So put simply on the question, how can community more effectively affect policy? And I think the first point is, in my opinion, communities of interest can be more effective in affecting policy by understanding the honest nature and the processes of policy making within the legal authorities that impact your targeted policy areas. So I think tonight the topic is generally, focused on multicultural and anti-racism and inclusion. And I think it's important to understand that this policy is both a federal and a provincial responsibility, and is often shared and overlapped. For example, multicultural and anti-racism policies and programs fall under both legislation at the federal and the provincial level, and both of these authorities implement and administer public policies and programs, and they use similar processes to manage them. So if you want to craft a policy issue and come forward with a policy recommendation, it's important to understand that you also should be prepared to propose solutions to the problems at hand. What is your theory of change? How do you think you will make changes in the communities of interest in the policy areas? What evidence do you have to support your policy proposition? And what do you think it will cost in terms of funding and resources? Now, normally public policy starts with a problem statement. So, and remember this, politicians love to solve your problems, or at least be seen to be solving your problems, that especially those that concern voters and citizens. So these problems are usually first defined at the political level, where political parties create their election platforms, which reflect their values and principles and the issues that they think are of interest to the public. And when a particular party is elected to govern, then they usually proceed to follow the traditional steps in our system, which include outlining their general ambitions in an annual throne speech. And those often happen in the spring. And they're usually not paid particular attention to by the public, but they are paid a great deal of attention by the bureaucrats and the public servants. Now, after the throne speech, which gives a general principles, high aspirational goals of the government, then this is sort of assigned to various ministries in specific language. And these policy goals and objectives are usually put into public documents that you can research, and in there, the business plans of the ministries. And then furthermore, the premier or the prime minister will assign to a minister the responsibilities to manifest these policies. And usually it's called sort of a mandate letter. And those are also publicly available. At that point, usually the staff and the assigned ministries will proceed to implement various processes, which may include community consultations, research, analysis, and it will hopefully result in a new or modified program, service, or funding stream. Now, if the new program or require additional funding, then these budgets have to be created and approved by the Treasury Board. So the Treasury Board has a great deal of influence on whether or not they will approve the funding. You'll know you'll be making progress when you see your issues starting to show up in annual budget pronouncements. And that's very important to keep an eye on where the money goes, because essentially the bottom line is you need funding to create the resources and energy. The first phase may take months or years to achieve these, in terms of the initial defining of what the problems are. And you need to be prepared to keep leaning on government to be accountable to continue to support the new policies with resources and funding for long-term and sustainable success. Another phase that I would like to speak about if we have time are the potential strategies and tactics for effective advocacy, because advocacy is another whole subject, but it's important. And if there's time later on, let's talk about it. So the slide that's being shared with you are my just top of mind bullets on a summary of what I would recommend you do. And again, define your goals in plain, simple language, craft your messages for specific audiences, determine if your policy goals align with those of the government or political parties, conduct an environmental scan in order to identify your allies and identify key decision makers, champions, and influencers. Generate written statements about your solutions to the policy problems and describe the intended impacts. And be prepared to defend your proposed solutions with evidence and data. And again, provide realistic estimates of potential costs to implement or cost of inaction. And finally, if you really want to lean into this, develop written, strategic action plans and timelines for your lobbying efforts. And that's a whole other topic in terms of how to be an effective lobbyist. So that is my response to your first question. Amir, over to you. You want to continue?
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to pass it on to Hira to introduce our second speaker.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that. It's very insightful. I'm actually kind of curious what the second piece is about advocacy and stuff, so it should be interesting. So our next speaker is Sebastian Zane. Sebastian Zane is a second-generation Lebanese-Canadian in Vancouver. His twin interests in built environments and public policy have led him to a career in real estate development, consulting, with past roles in provincial and municipal politics. He received a BA in economics from UBC and believes curiosity is the most underrated virtue. So our question to you, Sebastian, is what is universalism and how is a healthy degree of universalism responsible for the success of liberalism across Canada?
Thank you, Hira. It's an honor to be here. And I just want to start by saying I actually first met Alireza at a rock concert. King Ram, an Iranian human rights activist, came and performed in Vancouver. And during this rock concert with Alireza, I had this fantastic hour-long esoteric conversation on Granville Street in Venue. I think that might be the first and only time that's ever happened. And if anyone could do that, it's Ali. So let's do him proud of some great conversation here. A little bit less background noise. So the topic of unity and diversity is perfect because it really, it's so important and their role is played in both my life and Ali's. And I'll get to it in a little bit, just how universalism facilitates this. So first, let's zoom out a bit and appreciate how rare what we have in Canada is. So we're two Middle Eastern guys in Vancouver and the rainforest in the Pacific Ocean. Now, this is strange, and both of us feel very welcome here and can have a fulfilling, integrated life. This doesn't happen in too many places in the world. It's very much a Canadian story. Canada, of course, has one of the highest per capita immigration rates in the world, and some of the highest public support for immigration among any country in the world, both by polling data and by just the revealed preferences of what governments do here after getting elected. So this is a real Canadian success. And it's always important to study our successes as a country, not just our problems. And Ali and I would often get together and discuss what let this happen in Canada. How did we become so successful in this regard that so many other countries fail at? And what we kept coming back to is a spirit of universality, specifically universality with respect to people's identities. So what this means is that acceptance and integration into Canada, according to the people already here, according to the government here, acceptance and integration into Canada from newcomers is contingent on someone wanting to be here. It's contingent on them wanting to abide by the law and the Constitution, and on them wanting to contribute positively to the country, regardless of what their identity matrix is like. So acceptance and integration isn't contingent on nationality or race or religion. It's contingent on, are you going to contribute positively? And this seems to be an attitude that's tough for countries to get. Most countries are very much hung up on privileging one sort of ethnic group or national group, but not in Canada. So that seems to be responsible for lots of our successes here. Now, this doesn't mean that people's identities are not important to them personally, but I think it recognizes that achieving this level of broad public acceptance of a highly diverse and constantly growing population depends on the avoidance of identity-based hierarchies. Now, of course, both Ali and I, our roots are in different countries, and this type of Canadian universalism is in very sharp contrast to the place my parents moved here from. So I was born here, but my parents came over from Lebanon in the late 1980s. And the reason they chose to do that is in that part of the world, there is no spirit of universalism. It's actually the opposite of Canada in that respect, with a very strict identity-based framework in which each person is seen as a function of whatever subnational identity group they hold, rather than as part of a unified whole. And then, of course, to go along with each identity in that region, there is an associated narrative corresponding to each identity about how they've specifically been oppressed by one or more other groups there, and why it's therefore the right of that group to fight for a special deal specific to them. And so, of course, when you take this type of identity-based, non-universal framework to its logical conclusion, you get what you had in Lebanon in the 80s, and that's mass sectarian violence, multiple invasions from other countries, and the inability to achieve anything resembling unity. It was plenty of diversity, it still is, but there's no unity to go along with it. And what we see in Canada is the combination of those two things. And just to drive the point home, just to illustrate how seriously they take identity in that part of the world, there are even several instances where different clans of the same religious sect would go and massacre each other because of some old grievance they had. And they would do this during the war when they're supposed to be fighting for their survival. So that's the opposite extreme. And of course, Alireza shared a similar view on how the Iranian government operated. And this is why Canada was so appealing for both of us, a place where we can live life and be treated with dignity and not as ambassadors for some identity, which may happen to be privileged or not at that moment. And so we would talk about the success of Canada's immigration, talk about what sorts of factors led to it. But of course, we would also analyze looming problems, not just successes. So one of the problems that we would often discuss, especially in our later visits, was how it seems the spirit of universalism in North America is being a little bit eroded and potentially replaced with a framework more based on identity. So our institutions appear increasingly preoccupied with certain identity markers instead of creating a narrative or mission for a diverse population to unite around. To have unity, you need something to unite around. And let's be honest, Canada's population is quite geographically distant. It's quite culturally distant, even without immigration in the mix. And it's also increasingly ethnically diverse. So this to us looks like it should be the main priority of our country's leadership to be putting forward a mission that inspires and unites a diverse population. And it's my view, I won't speak for anyone else, that that's not happening in Canada right now. So what we're seeing is a kind of void filling. And this void filling with a more identitarian framework threatens to undermine some of the successes that have made Canada such a welcoming place. So my call to action for everyone here, Ali always understood the need for people to act, not just talk. What positive mission should Canada have? What would inspire you? What should we be working towards? I'll leave it at that, and looking forward to continuing the discussion later on.
Thank you, Sebastian. I remember that concert very well, and I'm glad that you talked about that. And you brought some point of view that is often not discussed in a lot of circles such as ours. So our next speaker will be George Abraham. George brings 30 years of writing and newsroom management experience to new Canadian media. He began his journalism with the Times of India in Mumbai, followed by stints at Khalij Times in Dubai, and he was the managing editor of the Peninsula in Qatar. He's a journalist with very high ethical standards. And George won many prestigious awards such as the Nieman Scholarship at Harvard University. And more recently, he pursued a Master of Journalism at Carleton University. That was 2004. I got to know George through Alireza, even though we never met while Alireza was around. But I knew the great work that he was doing through New Canadian Media. And now my question is regarding one of the articles that Alireza wrote in New Canadian Media. And the title was, "Immigration is a Scary Topic. We Need to Talk About It." I want to ask George to expand on that. Does he share Alireza's opinion about on what he expressed in the title? And how does he, as a journalist, how does he think that we should talk about immigration and address it? Because and what is his criticism for mainstream media or points of improvement? George?
Hi, Amir. This is Jasper here from VAHMS.
Right.
I don't see George here, but George, if you're in the audience, could you raise your hand?
Okay. Okay. Let me see.
If he's not here, we can just take a pause and move on to the next panelist. And could be he might be having some technical difficulties, and then we can come back if he rejoins.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, so we'll wait on George. Hopefully he can come back. But in the meantime, I would like to welcome Jocelyn Huang. Jocelyn Wong is a fourth-year SFU student studying English, creative writing, and dialogue. As a prospective journalist and a program assistant to the Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue, she is passionate about telling complex stories in non-perspective, authentic, and equitable ways. Creatively engaging communities and narratives that have not historically been involved, in Jocelyn's opinion, is made through the life-changing practice of dialogue. She believes that we can combat polarizations and hate through meaningful connection. And because Jocelyn has based a lot of her studies off of dialogue, and we know that Alireza cared a lot about having dialogue on difficult discussion and issues in the community, my questions to you, Jocelyn, are first, how can we start dialogue? And second, how can we use dialogue to ensure connection amongst communities in a time of such complexity actually happen?
Hi, thank you so much for asking those questions. And I'll dive into it in a second, but I just wanted to start by saying I'm super grateful and excited to be here as a young Asian woman during Asian Heritage Month, during such a time of complexity for not only Asian folks, but everyone in the world. And also with that the practice of dialogue in itself is indigenous in nature, is decolonial, and meant to bring together diverse stories and just a respect for our words. And so I'm very lucky to be here. My name is Jocelyn. I work as a program assistant for the Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue. Essentially, we co-create solutions, we exchange knowledge, we support community engaged learning, and help build the capacity of others in the knowledge and practice of dialogue. What is dialogue? Dialogue brings together many voices, stories, perspectives to come to a shared understanding. You might be wondering, how does that connect at all to Alireza? We know that he loved dialogue, but how is this young Asian girl involved at all with somebody that she's never met? I've never met Alireza, but I felt like this opportunity to come to this panel came at a time where I needed to feel like unity was possible. It was right around the time of the shootings in Atlanta, and during a time where I just was coming to terms with what it meant to be a racialized person in the world. And so this opportunity to speak on somebody who I oddly feel like I probably know in real life, or we would have shared conversations that would have been really awesome and diverse and truly dialogical. But as also a prospective journalist, I think it's really important that we use dialogue to come to shared understandings and to make change. So yeah, I asked the question, will there ever be unity around the time that Alireza's panel, to be a panelist, the opportunity came up. And I was reading up on Alireza and I found one quote that said, quote, "As a citizen of the world, I believe in the concept of human security that puts the well-being of people at the center of peace and security. In my opinion, and in the Center for Dialogue's opinion, this is what dialogue can do. Regardless of your political standing, we are nonpartisan. We believe that if at any point, somebody's world, somebody's feeling oppressed, that is where we step in. And so how do we do dialogue? Dialogue can seem like just talking with somebody. Some people ask me, like, is dialogue just a conversation? Well, dialogue is decolonial in nature, meaning it's non-prescriptive. Think about all of the colonial values that we hold on to, like having results or having tight deadlines. Like dialogue to me and to the center is decolonial, it's non-prescriptive, it's compassionate, and it's equitable. And it's never perfect, because a very capitalistic colonial thought is perfection is attainable when it's not. We're always learning and we're always growing. Which kind of brings me to the question next is, how can we do it now? How can we practice dialogue during a time of such complexity, of such hate, during a time where anti-Asian hate crimes have increased by, I believe, almost 700% in Vancouver. And that is a disgusting statistic that feels really hard to swallow. And so it might be easy to think right now, it's not possible to do it. But regardless of how we feel and regardless of the validity of our pain right now, the only way for us to move forward is through trauma. And to understand that our systems are systemically racist, systemically is white supremacist in nature, and that if we want to move forward, we need to embrace nuance, but also ensure the safety of people who are being oppressed. I have a lot of quotes. I'll add one more. Alireza once said, quote, "Coercive diplomacy never works when the coerced are fighting for their existence," end quote. And I think that's a very apropos line for what's happening in the world right now, but also in what dialogue embraces this idea that we can come together and we can have different voices and different opinions, so long as one's opinions isn't fighting into a colonial system that is harmful and oppressive. So dialogue brings us all together to come to no set result, but to a shared understanding. And I think this is what Alireza wanted to practice in his life. I don't know, I never knew him. I wish I knew him. But I feel like if I did, he would also probably like this quote. It's my favorite quote by Lilla Watson, and it goes, "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And I think that's what we need to do to move forward during this time, and hold our hands together. I may not be the same race as Alireza was, and I may not have the same opinions, but I believe in the well-being of humans. And I think that that's how we will move forward if we practice that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Remain patient. Authentic social changes are never decreed or legislated. We should remain patient and realize that democracy is not granted, but earned through an enduring process. We can try to accelerate that process through consistency and concentration in executing our strategies. So patience is the key to have progress, and patience is what we have to celebrate Alireza's legacy. And I think it's important what Jocelyn talked about, even though she never met Alireza, never knew him before, was important. It's an important lesson for all of us. Now, this is the time that we can all jump in, join the discussion, ask questions, post questions to the panelists. And I guess we have one hand up. I guess that's Fred Sufi. If I'm not mistaken, Fred. Jasper, can you go over the rules for the questions? if you can.
Sure, yeah. Hi, folks. If you would like to submit a written question, there is a Q&A box at the bottom. And it seems that Fred has raised his hand, so I've unmuted Fred. So Fred, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's great to see, we are recognizing Alireza's contribution to all of us, I think. Yeah, I got to know Alireza through a movement which started like as a green movement. And I could see how he could bring people together. We thought being so excited and so, I am Iranian-Canadian, which have been in Canada for 50 years and always been involved with social justice, diversity, equality, and then always I wanted to see dialogue, which we do not see in Iranian communities so much. Unfortunately, somehow Iranian culture, or I cannot say culture, but the thing is, we get so excited when we say things, and we do not are used to much of the dialogue. And anyway, so when I saw a person which is much younger than me, and he likes the dialogue, he's so cool, and he wants to bring the people together, and he cares about First Nation, and which I do much care about that, because I lived in Saskatchewan, and I knew the history of the Louisiana and so much about First Nation. So we just got so close to each other, and we could always discuss and talk, and sometimes we would talk about 2-3 hours, and we could understand each other. So I really appreciate a person like Alireza, and I could see his contribution to our society. And we really miss him, especially the time. I know if Alireza was alive today, he could say a lot about that conflict in Gaza between Israelis and Palestinians, because again, in that situation, we need dialogue, not fighting, not killing each other, which we don't get to anywhere. So, so I know, he is one of those persons which I really appreciate, and I really miss him, and that's all I can say about Alireza at the moment. Thank you for letting me to say a few words about him.
Thank you so much, Fred, for your very kind words and remembering Alireza in such a positive light. We'd like to open up the floor to questions from the attendees. So like Jasper said, there's a question and answer box in the bottom corner, or you can raise your hand. But because we are very short on time, the event does close at 7:30. Please keep your questions direct to a panelist or just the panelists in general. Thank you.
And now we have one question for Jocelyn. Is dialogue a skill someone can acquire? If so, how can we see it more in action in our community and spread it around the world?
That's a really wonderful question. Thank you to whoever sent it. Dialogue, I believe, is something that we are always practicing around us. It's when we have this spirit of curiosity to want to learn, we open up the possibility to be wrong, we unlearn, we relearn, we engage in conversations that put together diverse experiences and stories. And so I think dialogue is something we are all inherently practicing all the time, but as we practice it, it is also lifelong in that we can always be improving. It's kind of taking a step back and thinking about where your bias is. What position of power are you coming from when you're speaking at a table? How accessible are you being with your language? There are so many things to consider when we practice dialogue. So it is kind of a muscle that you can practice, but also something that if you're a compassionate and empathetic person, you will kind of automatically be practicing in your life. And how can we bring it to communities? I specifically think about marginalized communities, is again, that whole accessibility piece, who are you offering things to? What communities are you involving? Are you supporting these communities in the way that they need, such as financially, whatever? And are you meeting them where they're at? Dialogue doesn't necessarily have to look like an hour panel or circles of dialogue. It's coming to a mutual understanding and trying to work together as a collective. And so, yeah, I think when it comes to smaller communities, and that's something that I think a lot about as someone connected to a lot of grassroots organizations, is that we have many different communities and identities from like our sexualities, our race, our culture. And so we can always come together and learn from one another. So, yeah.
That was a great question. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jocelyn, for answering it. We do have Iman on here as well, who would like to speak on Alireza's idealism. So please go ahead.
Hello.
Hi, Iman.
Hi, do you guys see me?
We don't, and I don't.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how I can.
Maybe Jasper can.
Yeah, I just promoted you to a panelist, so you should be able to turn your camera on now, if you wish.
I have no start video. Yeah, I think, oh, all right. First of all, quickly, I know you guys are short on time. I would like to say thank you, especially to the organizers. My name is Iman from Newcastle, England. I'm Alireza's cousin, and I'd like to say a special thank you to what Micheal Hwong said about Alireza's patience. I remember when me and Alireza, I came from England to visit Alireza when he was registering in college in Vancouver. We were both fiercely idealistic, but something that Micheal Hwong said, and I think Amir also referred to, was as fiercely as I was idealistic, I didn't have Alireza's patience, especially when it came to value systems that are basically opposite to mine. Alireza had that patience, and something really, really practical. His idealism was mixed with a bit of realism. And he was able to, still today is difficult for me to view a value system which, well, in my view at least, is so away from humanity, or what I perceive as humanity, and not judge. But Alireza was able to not judge and listen. And this is something that came up, Amir and Micheal also, and his patience was legendary. And patience, we can just talk about patience being legendary, but how much patience do we have when the other side's value systems and belief systems are precisely what you see as wrong, ill, even evil? How much patience do you have with the value system that you consider hurting human beings? What you consider, not the opposite side, obviously. And although we're both fiercely idealistic and close cousins, I did not have his patience. I still don't. And really, really is something I would like to just point out, and bless his family, bless Fatima, and bless his memory. Thank you so much to the organizers.
Thank you, Iman. I'm glad that you brought up this point. Yeah, in terms of patience, there was a time, and this is a very personal story, I told a few people about that I was like, I was very angry at something, and I was basically I wanted to crash and burn stuff. And I vented with Ali, and he listened patiently, and he was like, okay, you crash and burn things, then what? And that was like basically immediately cooling me off. And I just couldn't believe how humanly possible was for someone to have that kind of patience. Moving on to Grace. She has a question for Jocelyn or other panelists, whoever wants to answer. What is something that youth can do in non-policy or political spheres to support diversity and unity? Jocelyn or whoever else wants to jump in after that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Hi, Grace. So thank you for coming. I think that's a wonderful question, as I am myself a youth. And I think youth sometimes get a bad rap for not caring about issues or not having the compassion, especially if you have YouTube and you look at the YouTube comments and you see, even Facebook, the amount of polarization that comes. So I think the ways that youth can get involved is by, for example, more and more media is becoming a huge part of our lives. You do have a voice on social media. You do have the ability to advocate for what you want and what you need. And it doesn't stop from there. There are many organizations within British Columbia and all over the world that engage youth in wanting to be involved in issues like this. So for example, there's Apathy is Boring. There's many other organizations that you can create from the grassroots up. And also just kind of community initiatives that you can get involved in. It's using your voice. It's about telling your stories. I don't think if somebody asked me a year ago to speak on this panel that I would feel qualified or comfortable coming to. And more I'm learning that it's not that I need to feel comfortable, but it's that I need to push myself to come to these events because I am the future. I am a youth. I am a queer person. I'm a person of color. I'm a child of an immigrant. I am everything. I have many different identities. And for me, I think what's helped empower me is to know that, yeah, I'm the future and that it's so important to get involved and to just have compassion for those around me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bill, Sebastian, any comments?
As a former youth, in sharing some of my lived experience, because, you know, it's interesting. I, believe it or not, one time was a youth advocate. In my 20s, I spent most of my energy, I was a youth counselor, and I initiated many projects in my community on youth in crisis and youth in the law and youth in addictions and youth in mental health. And I have to tell you, 50 years later, my perspective is I'm very frustrated, and sometimes I get as angry as David Suzuki does about the lack of progress on issues he spent his entire lifetime. And he's in his 80s now. And if you've ever heard David Suzuki speak about the current state of affairs, he's a very angry person because he's frustrated. And one of the things about being a young person is that you will age out of this category. And so I take the long run view now. I have no choice. But my observation is that don't put yourself in a box in terms of, well, let's see what the youth think about this. The more intergenerational work, as you see in the environmental movement, you have grandmothers against environmental degradation working with young people. I'm a grandfather. I have a vested interest in intergenerational continuity. My sister's two daughters are marrying Filipino and Indonesian men. And so now my new family are beautiful little brown babies. So who would have predicted in my lifetime that we would have this synergy and this integration of perspectives? So I think for young people, I think take the long view and cultivate your own influence, your own power, cultivate relationships with potential power brokers and future decision makers, because over the time, these people, your friends and close relations, will elevate into more and more powerful roles as decision makers and influencers. So I think for young people, I encourage, if you can and find the time, to take the long view and cultivate intergenerational relationships and contacts that could be an advantage to you, both as mentoring and learning, and learning from the past mistakes that we have made as well.
Thank you so much, Bill. Sebastian and Jocelyn, and just a reminder to keep an eye on the time, please.
So the question was non-policy and non-political ways to advance unity and diversity. My answer is very simple, and that's friendship. Friendship is the practice of diversity. And the beautiful thing about friendship is it cuts through all the abstractions. Anyone can voice agreement with the abstractions on the subject and say they believe all the right things. But to actually be someone's friend, that can only come from a place of authentic love. For that person, to let them in on your life, to share some of your secrets. You can't do that unless you actually have that spirit of love for people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different streams of thought. So just make sure when you're out and about meeting people that you're open to actually befriending people of a diversity of backgrounds. And then if enough people do that, then we have no problem.
Thank you. Jocelyn?
Yeah, I would like to kind of bring it back to this idea that dialogue is a decolonized practice and something that is indigenous naturally. And I don't know if many people have heard about the 7 generational principle within like Iroquois philosophy or indigenous philosophy. It's this belief that the change that we want to see, we won't see for 7 more generations, because as Bill said, we are playing the long game. And I think what empowers me in that sense is that we can't do it alone. We can only do it when we work together in a spirit of collectivism and mutual aid. But kind of, I feel like it brings me peace knowing that in 7 generations, if I put all my work and I put all of my compassion into something, that my kids or their kids or whatever can be put together and have the world that I wish to see.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the youth and the Youth at Heart panelists. We go to Mohammed, who had his hand up a while back. Just briefly, because we're very short in time. Mohammed, if you want, you can speak.
You're on mute, by the way.
Okay, we can go to our questions. We had 2 questions, and actually we had 1. So for Sebastian, why should we believe in and practice universalism while there's such a fierce competition between different interest groups and nations, and there is no real reward system for cooperation? Can you briefly answer that, Seb?
Oh, that's we're really answering the small questions that can be done in a condensed period of time here. Great question, and my answer to that is it actually is beneficial in the Canadian context, right? I'm making a specific case about Canada. Maybe this isn't for every country, but if you look at what Canada has to do to build itself out, to support its economy, to get a viable population, to have an independent place here, we have to do that via immigration. The alternative is a tiny population that probably can't maintain this place as a viable independent country. So it's this universalism that actually is leading to the strengthening and further development of Canada. It's a very constructive force here. And I think if we didn't have it, this would be a vastly diminished place. So it's actually quite practical. And in addition to being a beautiful virtue that I think many of us like on pretty idealistic grounds, in this specific context in Canada, it's just practically important too.
Thank you, absolutely. Mohammed, if you'd like to maybe go ahead and take time to speak. I don't think we're able to hear you.
Maybe we go to Kini and then come back to Mohammed. Kini.
Okay. So Kini has said that she met Ali in 2005 and he was one of the most engaged listeners and solution-focused thinkers. So the question she has for the panelists is to look past our biases. He had a way of bringing role of language. I think the question got cut off.
My question got all messed up.
Go ahead. You know what, Kini, you can
yeah, I don't know what happened. It sent too early or something. Anyway, I wanted to say that Ali was one of the most sorry, I've got a 4-month-old on me, was one of the most engaged listeners, and people have pointed out how calm and respectful he was in dealing with people with differing views and sort of focusing on solutions. So I'm just wondering if the panelists can talk a little bit about the use of inclusive language. He was really a master at that, and that's how he moved dialogue forward. So I'm just interested in the panelists' thoughts on that.
I could take a crack at this one. So one thing I noticed Ali was excellent at, and this is a very good general principle too, when you're meeting someone for the first time from a different background, always find the points of agreement. And even if there isn't some specific point of agreement about some policy, there's certainly agreement in some stated value. And maybe the interpretation of that value differs, what it means for each person, but you can at least agree to some kind of value statement. And then you build from there, you build their trust, you get comfortable, both of you sharing what you think. And that's how you make people feel heard. Focus on the points of agreement first. And then if you want to get into other subjects, there's this at least bond, right? We have something unifying us. And unfortunately, we have this tendency these days to almost do the opposite and search for some wrong thing and then problematize it when you don't really know someone, but we should be doing the opposite.
I just have a
brief answer to that too. My experience with him was that he was master at the Socratic method. He asked questions. And I think if we all learn to ask questions rather than be prepared to defend our positions and attack or something, if we become more curious and listen further.
Can I just add to that? I was going to say that, Micheal, also, that our process with Socratic method, which I think is very useful after these many thousands of years of its application. And I think what I found, there's something more to Alireza than I think I just come to appreciate. I think everybody that met him probably thinks that they were one of his best friends. And I remember distinctly at his celebration of life at the hotel in North Vancouver, and the huge crowd that showed up to celebrate his life. And I was most astounded as a former government bureaucrat watching the number of politicians that got up to spoke, and those that became emotional and started crying at the podium. I've never seen that before. And I thought goes beyond your average sort of decorum that a politician would get up and start crying in public about somebody that was a journalist that interviewed them, that engaged them. So he had some other special magical talent to bring people into his informality and his sense of trust and confidence that they would have to befriend him. There was something special about his personality and character.
Awesome. We had a couple of hands up before, but they brought them down, and that was one for Mohammed, one for Aryan. If either one of them want to speak. Oh, somebody has their hand up. Aryan, you go first and leave enough time for Valentine.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for organizing the event and for keeping his memory alive. And to keep his memory alive is also to engage in difficult conversations and asking tough questions. And in that spirit, one topic of conversations that we had that also speaks to the theme of the event today is the tension between diversity and identity politics on the one hand, and unity and universalism on the other, because the nature of identity politics sometimes requires that kind of delineation of identity and differentiation from the other. It is by nature polarizing. You could argue that polarization is good because it gives recognition and dignity to different communities, but it is polarizing nonetheless. And how do you identify this sweet spot between giving enough recognition to communities without actually coming to this polarizing extent that makes it impossible to have a more unified or harmonious society? Thank you.
Anybody?
I just had a brief comment. Again, I always say it's a brief comment, but I've been reflecting and I've been engaging former colleagues from my days in multiculturalism and anti-racism, and that goes back, many years. And I made a distinction between some of what I call the old guard of multiculturalism, who promoted that newcomers to Canada integrate into Canadian society. That was their strongest message, and I think in the younger people, in terms of the the issues and the politics around identity politics, there are some challenges between the generational perspectives on integration of immigrants or assimilation and the debate, because often the debates around economic benefits and quid pro quo and the balance of why the question of immigration that 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the dialogues, Jocelyn, were focusing on what does it mean to be a Canadian? What are Canadian values? And you do not hear these conversations anymore. There's very few conversations and dialogues about, Canadian citizenship and what does it mean. They're sort of on the fringes around policy and the questions for the Canadian citizenship test. But I see a shift has occurred in the last 10 to 15 years in terms of where the conversation about integration and the Canadian assimilation of newcomers versus the complexity of identity politics as we're subdividing ourselves into the intersectional identification of who and are on all of the scope of gender, sexuality, orientation, race, etc. So I think it's a real chaotic time to sort of move forward, and I don't see any strong leadership coming from any particular voice in government or elsewhere, think tanks leading this to have those dialogues moving forward.
Thank you.
Michael, you had something to add?
Michael?
Yeah, just want to chime in from legal perspective. We always talk about activism and policies in terms of government being the main actor to implement or formulate and implement policies on any social issues. But, when we talk about diversity, we have to acknowledge that we're all different and that one size doesn't fit all, and we allow others to be who they are. And if you see something on social media that's offensive, you have freedom to just scroll on instead of engaging in debate. You don't have to fight every fight. But know that there is other branch of this system called judiciary, grounded upon the wisdom of common law, the body of rational thinking that's built up hundreds of years, and coupled with rule of law. So even when the government policies go stray off from the agreed set of values that we have in our Constitution and Charter of Rights, know that ultimately we have to protect and honor and respect our judiciary system to be guardian of the large framework to keep us all happy within this country called Canada.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I wanted to read you a little piece from one of Ali's articles in closing. And this is the article that I wanted to ask George about. And unfortunately, George had some technical issues. He could not join us. So the road ahead. It must be remembered that even though it takes us less than a second to divide the world into us versus them, those categories are malleable. We belong to multiple groups. What counts as them can change quickly if we extend the definition of who counts as us. In other words, if there is a will to reach out to them, there is a way for them to become part of us. In a recent roundtable organized by Equitas in partnership with Simon Fraser University on building connected communities in Vancouver, Grand Chief Stuart Phillips made a suggestion about how to engage our opponents in a dialogue. He said, value people's feelings and intentions, but challenge their assumptions, rationale, and decisions. And other participants in the event, Rita Ishak Nidiai, the former United Nations Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, offered another solution. She said that we have to be able to have uncomfortable conversations in comfortable environments. If we expand our identity and invite them to become part of us, and if we respect the integrity of our opponents and engage the content of their arguments, we can create an environment in which we can talk about uncomfortable topics comfortably. In that way, we can protect our communities from politicians who want to capitalize on our differences by fueling the us versus them dichotomy. We always strive to keep at bay those who, instead of bringing us together, try to divide us for political gain. And these were the words, and I'm saying, these were the words of a concerned citizen. That's how Alireza always introduced himself, not as an activist or analyst or all the other titles that I would give to him or any of us would, but as a concerned citizen. Hira?
Thank you so much, Amir, for that. So with that being said, thank you everyone for attending and taking the time out of your long weekend to gather here with us and honor our dear, dear friend Alireza's memory in such a positive and productive manner. All of us here, we hope that you have had the opportunity today to learn something, to take something away, and have been inspired to courageously have difficult dialogue and conversations within your own circles. This is just a beginning of the journey for Alireza's loved ones to honor his legacy and to continue his great work. So it's important to remember that these small conversations create larger and lasting changes. So with that being said, thank you again for joining us and participating. We look forward to continuing Alireza's legacy, and we hope that you all have a wonderful evening. Good night.